The fact of the matter is we can't have that.
Hey, pause this a minute, Anthony.
Director, do you have the ability personally, and do you have the authority?
Pete, we're joined now by Pete Forcelli. He's been on our show before. Pete is the author of Deadly Path, probably one of the most interesting and factual books about government missteps that led to, deaths, a death of a Border Patrol agent and countless other deaths in the U.S. and elsewhere. Pete, thanks for joining us. We're just watching this hearing today. I know you've been watching it a little earlier before you jumped on. Give us your thoughts about what you've seen so far real quick, and then we'll go back to it live.
I'm almost speechless, Bill. It's mind-blowing evasiveness. It's gross incompetence when you look at it from a leadership perspective. And I have the deepest respect for the men and women of the Secret Service. I never worked for the Secret Service. I've worked with them. I'm aware of the complexities of the planning and the work that they do. I mean, it's very, very in-depth. It's very, very thoroughly thought through. But the mistakes made here were glaring. And what troubles me the most is, look, some of the things that she's not answering are things that are observed on television. I mean, it's stuff that's available to the public. So while I understand the need to wait for an FBI investigation and their own investigations to pan out, there are things that she can answer that she's just absolutely not answering. Again, I'm very rarely speechless, but I found myself speechless through much of her testimony. Mind-blowing.
And real quick, Pete, I know you have testified before oversight committees. Real quick, what is the preparation like? And is it likely that the administration plays an active role in prepping this witness on what they're going to talk about today?
Oh, absolutely. Like before I testified in the Fast and Furious hearings, I was actually told not to testify. I was cautioned that it could cost me my job for speaking to members of Congress. But that's what leadership means, is you got to take the weight upon yourself and decide if you're going to do the right thing or not. And here she's representing every single man and woman that carries a Secret Service badge in their pocket. And her just unwillingness to answer those questions, despite what she might have been told that she can and can't do, is appalling to me. And look, I get it. Like I said earlier, there's an FBI investigation, and they don't always share information very well, as you know, with other entities, to include the Secret Service. They have their own internal investigation that has to pan out. But there are facts that are publicly known that she can address that she's absolutely just refusing to answer questions about. And look, when do you see both sides of the aisle cannibalizing a witness like this? It shows that they're as frustrated as we are. And again, complete lack of leadership and ownership. And she's the captain of the ship. And I have a feeling she's going to own this real quick. And I would be surprised if she's still employed by the Secret Service by the end of this week.
Yep. All right. So let's go back to it live. And Pete, please jump in, interrupt. If you want it paused, we'll pause it. If you see something that doesn't make sense, I know from following you as I do on social media platforms that you have some insight as to what happened here. And hey, I'll leave it at that.
Sure.
Authority to beef up security of any of your protectees?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So were you also aware there was a credible threat President Trump was facing? He was facing a heightened security threat to a foreign adversary?
Yes.
Okay. So given that there was an increased threat to President Trump's life, was he provided a full security complement akin to what a sitting U.S. president would receive?
He was provided a full complement of security based on the threat assessment that we had.
That's not my question.
And the venue.
My question is, if he'd been the sitting president, would he have had the same security he had on July 13th?
Just answer no. He would have had more security.
There is a difference between the sitting president.
So your answer is he didn't.
And continuity of government and the responsibility
that we have. So he did not. Okay, there wasn't a CAT team, full CAT team on site. There wasn't counter surveillance teams on site. But this is the thing. You just said you had the ability to beef up the security. You knew about the threat, and you didn't. And that's as telling as it is chilling.
You know,
we have satellite images from the.
Go ahead, Pete.
Dr. Jill had an appearance in the
not.
same county on the same day. And my understanding, someone has approached Grassley's staff, a whistleblower, saying that Donald Trump had 3 post-standers. Jill had 12. And Jill's not.
Yep, I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that, Pete. Hey, Pete, the second thing, and I want to hear from you on this because I know I know your roots, man. New York City police officer, a beat cop. When you hear about, and I have the initial report, the initial report by the committee that I've been going through and kind of matching it up to what they've been talking about. When you hear that this guy Crooks was spotted with a rangefinder, doing all this suspicious stuff, did part of you just say, how come nobody contacted him?
Yeah.
How come no uniform?
Well,
right.
Without a doubt. Look, then the other thing they could have done is they could have held off on letting Donald Trump take the stage until this area was secure. Don't forget, Donald Trump wasn't even on a stage when they first identified him as a threat. And look, I get it. There are some issues. I've worked on joint, operations with other agencies, both DSS, Secret Service, local police departments. One of the big problems is there's not interoperability. The radios don't talk to one another. And sometimes if you need to talk to somebody from another team, you need to be standing next to someone from that agency to communicate with other people from the agency that you're, wanting to talk to somebody from. But this was plenty of time. I mean, some folks say over half an hour. Think about that. If you just sit there and look at your watch for half an hour, that's a long, long time. Even 5 minutes if you're staring at your watch. So the communication failures here are unacceptable. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, and I've heard that same thing about communication, and we know that that's frequent when you mix agencies together. Depending on what city you're in, there may or may not be the ability to communicate with everyone directly, and I've heard that was a big issue here.
Yeah. Well, look, the other thing is Jill Biden, when you look at the crowds that she gets, they're not very big. Even Joe Biden doesn't get very big crowds. They know the size of the crowds that Donald Trump gets. And those post standers are there to be the eyes and ears of the people that are on his protective detail, the eyes and ears sometimes of even the snipers who are the eye in the sky. So the fact that there were 3 people knowing that Donald Trump routinely attracts over 10,000 people is mind-blowing. And look, pointing fingers at the locals doesn't float. Your job is to protect the protectee. They're there to help you. You own it. Her failure to own this is one of the biggest leadership failures I think I've ever seen in my life, to be honest with you. And it almost sounds like I'm exaggerating, Bill, but I really mean that.
Yeah. No, I agree, Pete. Let's roll it, Anthony. Let's keep it going.
9 days and you have not visited the site. You should have been there that night. Did you talk to, that evening, did you talk to the team, the heroes that surrounded the president? Did you call them that night?
They were still operational work.
So that's an answer is no. Did you call them the next day?
President. Yes, I spoke with.
You called them the very next day, not the day of, or was it 72 hours after?
I don't know the timeline, but I spoke with
Okay,
them
because you're under oath.
immediately following.
I think it was 72 hours after. You waited 3 days. What is immediately clear is that there are a number of structures that need to be secured. Of these, Director, other than the first, immediate 4, what's the most dangerous site that should have been secured? Because security 101, you got to mitigate the high ground.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what the next most dangerous site? What was the closest structure to the president, other than the 4 immediate ones that you had your counter sniper teams on?
There are a number of structures around that event site.
You know who the shooter knew? The shooter has visited the site 2 more times than you have, and he had a drone, and he picked the AGR building. So you said, do you remember in an ABC interview you did that you didn't have people on the roof of the AGR building because you were worried about safety?
Pause this, Anthony.
I recall that.
Pete, I know you heard the slope roof thing. Meanwhile, the sniper teams on the other buildings are on a slope roof. Talk to me about that.
Well, not just that. The sniper teams that protect the White House are on a roof that's far more sloped than this at times. My driveway, Bill, no bullshit, is sloped at a steeper incline than that roof.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the excuses I've heard, they fall flat. They just fall flat.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Anthony, roll it.
All that statement.
Okay. Does the Secret Service have written policy you can share with us about slope roofs?
No.
Okay. So why'd you act like there was one? Because is it your practice to comment on enormous events of enormous national implications when you're ignorant of the facts? That's rhetorical. So here's this thing with the slopes. You go all up to like 1812. You can go to a 112, which is about as flat as you can get without it being completely flat. And you're saying that there was a danger, safety concern there. But the problem is, Director, you put your counter snipers on a 312 roof, which is steeper than the 112. And by the way, the
That's
112 is ADA compliant. You can build a ramp for a wheelchair on a 112 roof. So these are nothing but pathetic excuses, and they make no sense, and they're a bunch of cow dung. All the law enforcement I've spoken with over the last 9 days are amazed that the AGR rooftop was not secure. You want to know why? Because it's dangerous. I have never had any long gun training in my life. I own an AR-15, and last time I shot it one time my whole life. It was 6 years ago. That is until Saturday, where we recreated the events in Savoy, Texas. We recreated what happened in Butler. I was lying prone on a sloped roof at 130 yards at 6:30 at night. And I knew that he had a scope. I didn't know what kind, red dot or magnified. So I shot 8 rounds from both. You know what the result was? 15 out of 16 kill shots. And the one I missed would have hit the president's ear. That's a 94% success rate. And that shooter was a better shot than me.
Yeah.
It is a miracle President Trump wasn't killed. Corey Compatore's life is over because that damn shooter made it on the roof. And it wasn't the roof that was dangerous. It was a nut job on top of the roof.
True.
You know what else is dangerous? I believe your horrifying ineptitude and your lack of skilled leadership is a disgrace. Your obfuscating today is shameful. And you should be fired immediately and go back to Garden Doritos. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Woo.
Chair recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the chair, the ranking member, for coming together and holding this hearing. But I have to say, I don't think any of our concerns have been addressed today. And what little we've learned has not inspired much confidence. I will just say that we obviously can't allow the violence we're seeing in this country become the norm or a commonplace, but that seems to be where we're heading. On this occasion, it was, very shockingly, a former president and current political candidate at a rally that we all assume is one of the most secure places we can be. But the violence we saw last Saturday is the same culture of violence that makes too many of our kids and our community members feel unsafe to play outside or to go to class or to simply live their lives each day. But again, this was a political rally and it is supposed to be one of the most secure places. So we do have very specific questions about that. Director Cheatle, I'd like to start by following up on some of my colleagues' questions. My colleagues, Mr. Krishnamurthy and Mr. Frost, highlighted a number of points that showed the shooter presenting an active threat. So I'd like to ask you, Director Cheatle, to clarify what the protocol is for postponing or canceling an event based on a threat and how the events on July 13th didn't meet those standards.
Great question.
Yeah, it
Again,
is.
I think we're talking about the distinction between suspicious behavior and a threat. And at the time that this individual was identified, they were displaying suspicious behavior. I'm still waiting for interviews from the FBI to determine what it was that identified that individual as suspicious and what those behaviors were.
To that question, is suspicious behavior,
Pause
vary
Anthony.
between...
Pete, quick question. Like at what point, so if I see someone just wandering around, suspicious person, as soon as I see that person with a rangefinder, I was speaking earlier, to me, that makes it a threat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I just want to make sure.
Her obfuscation is truly astounding. I mean, but yeah, look, again, when do you see both sides of the aisle in the last 4 years coming together on any issue? And they all seem to be taking a swipe at this woman. And it's a shame because, again, she represents some defined men and women in the United States Secret Service. And in this instance, she is not representing them well. It's a disgrace.
Yep. Roll it.
Between different events. For instance, if we have an event with a president, would there not be a heightened standard for suspicious behavior?
I think that there are a number of ways that someone could be identified as suspicious, and it doesn't matter whether it's at a rally or an indoor event or who the protectee is. I think it's up to law enforcement or citizens to identify someone as suspicious.
Okay, thank you. According to the Associated Press, at least 6 different agencies, including 2 sheriff's office, local police, state police, as well as fire and emergency rescue officials were involved in securing the rally in Butler. When there are so many teams that are collaborating, who takes the lead and how is that determined?
The Secret Service is responsible for the security of the site and the coordination.
And that was the case on July 13th?
Correct.
Changing gears, in 2024's appropriations budget, the Secret Service was given a little over $3 billion, which was about $78 million above what was requested. For 2025's budget, you've requested yet another increase. How much of these funds goes towards training and improving protection procedures?
I would have to get back to you on the training aspect of it, but about 30% of our budget is for protection and facilities and training.
But clearly the problem can't be a lack of funding. So what exactly do you see as the core problem that led to this failure, that led to your agency being outgunned by a 20-year-old using his father's gun and acting on his own without a particularly sophisticated plan or technology?
I think that we are waiting to determine exactly what those failures or failure was so that we can make sure that the Secret Service is stronger after this.
So we've heard a lot today that you can't answer because it's an ongoing investigation, that you're still figuring out the details and that you won't answer basic questions. You've said 60 days for the investigation, but I simply don't think that's acceptable. Do you really plan to keep avoiding questions and the American people's questions, ours and the American people's questions, for the next 60 days?
Yes, she probably does.
I'm not avoiding
Yeah.
questions. I want to make sure that I am providing factual and accurate information.
Certainly, but is there no in between, right? Between what is obviously a fact and what you can surmise from the details that you already have?
I assure you, when I have a full and complete report of what took place on that day, I will certainly come back and make that available.
Certainly. Studies indicate that the United States is experiencing increasing levels of political violence and tension. Does the Secret Service see increasing political violence as a threat to its work? And if so, how is the Secret Service adapting its strategies and protocols to account for increasing political violence?
We are constantly evaluating the threats that we receive and monitoring that, and we make adjustments on a daily basis to our protectees based on what those threats are and what actions we need to take.
Yes or no? Do you believe that stricter controls on the availability of assault weapons would make it easier for the Secret Service to fulfill its missions of protecting public officials?
I think the Secret Service is tasked with providing a safe environment, which is why we put into place a number of mitigation factors.
Certainly, but do assault weapons make it easier or harder for you to do your job?
I think that any weapon makes it difficult for us to do our job.
Well, she dodged that one well. I'll give
I
her
yield
credit
back.
for that, not falling
right.
into the
Chair
trap.
now recognizes Mr. Donalds from Florida.
Right.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, real quick, at what time was Secret Service aware of the active threat against President Trump?
We're talking about the Iranian threat, though, or what?
Yeah, I think that's
Director, what time?
So the Secret Service was aware that there was an individual who had been identified as suspicious,
No, it's a local threat.
and that
Okay,
that
so that would be-
individual was attempting to be tracked down.
At what time?
I don't have a specific timeline other than to tell
Director,
you-
it's been 9 days.
I
Looks like
understand.
What time?
5:15 p.m. is
I
what it
want
looks
to make
like.
sure
on
that I give you factual information, sir.
Director, have you talked to the agents on the ground that day?
Yes, I have.
You've talked to all of them.
Mhm.
Your senior team has talked to every agent that was on the ground that day.
Yes, we have.
Have they all corroborated the same time they identified the shooter or they were made aware of the shooter, either by attendees in the crowd or local police department?
There are a number of reports of when those times were made.
Was it
those
5 minutes
notifications.
before the first shot rang out?
It was longer than that.
No,
Generally speaking, was it 10 minutes before the first shot rang out?
no.
Was it 15 minutes before the first shot rang out?
It was less than that time frame when it was identified as a threat.
How many
Well,
days before the shooting
Again,
took place,
so
did
Pete,
Secret
she's
Service
saying the
actually
threat is
do
when the
their
gun is
advance work to
pointed, and
secure
I'm
the
saying the
facility
threat
that
is when there's a
rally was
guy
gonna
with a
be held at?
rangefinder or someone up on a roof, period, who's not supposed to be up on a roof.
No, you're entirely correct. I mean, I'm surprised she's not saying that it wasn't a threat until he actually fired the first shot. I mean, her dodging is unbelievable. But, going back to what you said earlier, Bill, because I was thinking about it, when I testified, I was a GS-14 level employee testifying in front of
Right.
Congress.
Right.
I basically sat down with a PIO, not some high-level strategist, which she has access to. And he was basically telling me, hey, you need to know your facts. You need to be able to be in the ballpark. And you need to know a little bit about everyone on that committee so that you can have a relationship with them. You can kind of, I guess, build rapport, even though they're grilling you. She can approximate things. She can say, hey, I'm waiting for the final investigation. However, it's my belief. There are questions that she can answer without compromising any investigation. And she's just choosing to not do that. And I could imagine how badly the blood is boiling on the part of these folks who are just there asking questions, trying to really figure out what happened here so that they can act as leaders, and report back to their constituents. Her dodginess is, again, it's leaving me, as you can see, speechless.
Right. Let's roll it, Anthony.
All that.
5 days.
In the 5 days prior, when the security advance team did their work, did they identify the rooftop as a potential threat?
Again, I'm pulling those reports and that information.
It's been 9
to
days,
conduct those
Madam
interviews.
Director. Did they notice a rooftop 150 yards away that was a potential threat? Yes or no?
I am certain that the rooftop was noticed. I am pulling the reports.
What was the security parameters around securing that rooftop?
There
What
was,
did they do?
there was overwatch provided for that rooftop.
Did Overwatch fail?
I am waiting to hear what the results of the investigation
Can't have it both
were
ways.
so that I can identify
Yeah.
where the failure was.
Yeah.
who did you talk to that was on the ground that day that was responsible for Overwatch? What are their names?
I'm not going to provide their names in this setting.
Did you talk to the people that were providing Overwatch that day?
I've talked to the people that conducted the advance on that day and that were working the shift and were the counter snipers on that day.
So you talked to the counter sniper team. You talked to the people who were providing Overwatch that day, and you talked to the advance team, correct?
Yes, sir.
What did they tell you?
We are putting together a comprehensive report so that I can identify exactly where the gaps and the failures.
When the counter sniper team was on the roof and they identified that there was suspicious activity on the roof in question, what was the chain of command's orders around the person on said roof? Because I'm quite sure somebody saw in under your organization, the Secret Service, I'm quite sure somebody saw the shooter on the roof. So what was the communication through the chain of command to deal with said person?
What I can tell you is that when the individual was identified by the counter sniper, they took one shot and neutralized that individual.
But that was after the shooter already took a shot. Is that correct?
What's interesting
That is correct.
there are
So what you're
photos
saying now is
were
that the
provided by
Secret
some of the
Service,
snipers. They photographed him several times before they actually fired the shot. So
Yeah,
she's
so I
dodging.
put those photos up. I mean, this is in the report, Pete. You can see this was from the sniper team that was in the AGR building, and it might have been state and locals. I don't know, but whatever the case, they just looked out their window and took pictures of him, and this is where they learned he had the rangefinder.
Right.
And then they thought this was his bicycle with a couple bags next to it. So yeah,
Yeah. Again, she's full of crap.
yeah.
Service did not see the shooter on the roof until after the shooter took a shot?
I do not have all of those details at this time.
If you don't have those details after 9 days, Director, then what you're telling me is that you guys didn't see it. Is that correct?
I am telling you, I don't have all the details of the sequence at this time.
Director, it's been 9 days. Either you have the information or you do not. Is that correct?
We are still in the process of conducting interviews and an investigation.
Some of my colleagues have texted me over the last couple days, bipartisan, about whether you should lose your job. And I've been quiet on that question because I wanted to see what you were going to do today. In my opinion, you do need to be fired immediately. And it is because this is gross incompetence. And the fact that it's been 9 days, and these are simple questions to answer. I'm quite sure if I asked any one of my kids if they got in trouble and I told them to give me the details, I would get more answers from them than I'm getting from you right now. And that's what's frustrating on a bipartisan basis, on a nonpartisan basis. This is a joke. And Director, you're in charge. And that's why you need to go. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
He's right.
Chair now recognize Mr.
Yeah.
Goldman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I want to follow up and just understand a little bit why there is so much information about this out in the public,
Right.
including some from you and your communications team, and yet you're here pursuant to a subpoena under oath in front of Congress, and you're unable or unwilling to answer some of those same questions. Can you just explain why you are answering so many fewer questions here than you have to the media?
I'm answering the questions that I'm able to answer based on the fact that there are multiple ongoing investigations.
But you have answered some of these questions previously, correct? To the public, to the media.
Which questions?
Well, did you have an interview with ABC News?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you explain the interaction between local law enforcement and the Secret Service, and that local law enforcement was responsible for securing the perimeter of the building where the shooter was?
I said that the Secret Service is responsible for designing and implementing and executing the security plan, and that we rely on the assistance of our local law enforcement partners to assist us with that plan.
Let me ask you something. Were you given any instructions about what you can and cannot answer here today?
I mean, this is what I was getting at
My,
earlier, Pete.
ability to answer questions is solely reflective of the fact that there are multiple ongoing investigations, and I want to make sure that I provide accurate information that doesn't conflict with any of those investigations that are going on.
So is it your view that you can't talk about anything that happened that day until those investigations are completed?
My view is that I want to make sure that this committee and the American public gets correct and actual information.
And so is it your view that that can only happen after the completion of the investigation?
That's our point. That's what
It
we've
is
been
my
talking
view
about.
that when the investigations are complete, that we will be able to share that information.
And how about before that?
If I have factual information that I can share before that, I absolutely will.
I'm guessing you have factual information as to when the suspicious photograph of the suspicious person was relayed to the Secret Service. There's a timestamp on that text message or whatever it was, correct?
Sir, I'm sure you can understand that when you're dealing with text messages, emails, and other communications, the timelines don't always match up.
I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Not really.
That's
it's a
just
timestamp,
BS,
but
man.
Let me move on. Because you have acknowledged that this was a major security failure. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that it was a major security failure not to secure the rooftop of the building that the shooter shot from?
I believe at this time that the rooftop was provided Overwatch. I acknowledge that we are unaware at this time how the individual was able to access the roof.
Overwatch meaning
Ladder.
from
He had a
other
ladder.
counter
Yeah.
sniper, other higher points.
Correct.
And so was it a
pause
failure
Anthony,
then that
pause
when
that a second? I just
that-
want to go through that. I mean, I think it was what? So the report that I see at 9:27 a.m. They have closed circuit TV footage of him at Home Depot that day
Buying a ladder.
buying a 5.5-foot aluminum dual platform ladder.
Correct.
So that would be the kind, I guess, that kind of folds out like an A type ladder, right?
That's my understanding. Hey, Bill, look, I
yeah.
was actually called to speak very briefly just about like shooting scenes by Fox News that day. And this news was already out there about the ladder, about the police
Right.
seeing the ladder at some point. So, I mean, this blows my mind. But going back to what we talked about earlier, I mean, look, Dan Goldman is about as hard left as they come in the current, Congress. And then you
Yes.
have folks like Donalds, who is pretty hard right. When do you see people who aren't moderates agreeing, like you see agreement here on that this is an absolute failure and that she is being evasive and uncooperative with their congressional inquiry? It's comforting to see them finally agreeing on something. It's just sad that it's this. This should have never happened.
Yep. And Pete, I know we only have you for a short time longer, so I'm going to jump to something that I saw earlier today. There was talk about the ATF being involved in this incident and being potentially an agent on the roof that day, the quote gray suit individual. Can you talk about crime gun intelligence and how ATF anytime, and this I can speak to this from my experience at DEA, anytime there's a gun used in a crime, we rely on ATF to trace that gun and how that system works?
Sure. Well, that's actually easy. First, I can tell you the ATF agent in the gray suit is a fallacy. There was no ATF agent in a gray suit. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen an ATF agent in a suit other than in a witness box when I testified in front of Congress or if they're stuck in headquarters. Even when I was a special agent in charge in Miami, I almost never wore a suit unless I had to go to a meeting at the U.S. Attorney's Office. But what happens is when a serial number of a gun is obtained, that firearm can be traced. And what that entails is, believe it or not, calling ATF's tracing center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, giving them the information about the gun, and then a series of phone calls happens. So what happens is call the manufacturer, which in this case was DPMS, which is the manufacturer of the AR platform rifle that was used, and ask, hey, this gun was recovered. Can you tell us, when did you make it? Who did you send it to? So then they'll say, I sent it to Bill Bodner's gun shop, on a date, whenever that date was. So then they'll call Bill Bodner. Hey, Bill, can you tell us when you received this gun? Can you check your acquisition disposition book and then let us know who you sold it to? And, can you send us a copy of the form? And they do. Generally, the dealers, like I've said many, many times, are always incredibly cooperative. But it's a series of phone calls. Now, what I do know, and again, the little inside baseball is the shooter did not have identification on him. My understanding was they hadn't found it at that point. So the trace of the gun which did happen, but not by a guy in a gray suit, did occur. It led them to the shooter's father, who lawfully purchased that firearm. He had it in his possession for some time. And it was at that point, they also had apparently an image of the deceased. They were able to put the puzzle pieces together and figure out that the gun was purchased by this guy's father. And that's how they identified him, was by putting those puzzle pieces together. The other thing I heard was that the father called local law enforcement at least an hour before this happened, saying, hey, my son is missing and so is my weapon. Which again is another huge question that you have to figure out. Hey, you knew there was a weapon missing in that area. I mean, there's just so much there. But yes, an ATF agent did trace the gun, but the whole thing about the ATF agent in the gray suit that's a mystery. I don't know who it was. Could have been somebody posing as an ATF agent. Could have been somebody else. My understanding is it was not an ATF agent in the gray suit on the roof or near the roof.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Roll it, Anthony.
Shooter was on the rooftop, that Overwatch did not identify him before he fired his shots?
I don't have the timeline of how the individual accessed the roof, where they accessed the roof, or how long they were on the roof.
Let me ask a couple things quickly. You have testified here about all the resources that the Secret Service needed to deploy to protect the NATO summit and all of the leaders here. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you have to rely more on local law enforcement because of the NATO summit for this event?
The Secret Service routinely works with local law enforcement at every event. It doesn't matter whether it is a NATO summit, NSSE, the RNC in
No, but that's not my
Milwaukee.
question. Obviously, there's a natural give and take as to, I'm sure, how many agents you deploy and how much you rely on local law enforcement. Did you have to rely more on local law enforcement because there were fewer Secret Service assets available because of the NATO summit?
No.
See, that's not really the right question that should have been asked.
I
Pete.
hope
The
we get
question
answers
should have
before the
been, did they
completion.
have to rely more on
the fact that
HSI agents or other Department of Homeland Security agents? Because I know there was a big contingent of Homeland Security agents that were brought in to work this event.
And they're not trained in protective work, number
And
one.
they're
And
not.
then number
They're-
two, if you remember, when this first happened, and the whole thing about interagency operations happened, she first tried to blame local law enforcement for not securing that rooftop, which is entirely Secret Service's responsibility. Look, even if they delegated it, it's their job to make sure that the people are actually covering it. So, I mean, there's a lot of dodging and whatnot going on here. And on that note, Bill, I got to bail. But it was, as always,
Hey, Pete,
brother.
thanks, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate
Good seeing
you.
Take care.
Hey, one more time, Pete's book is The Deadly Path, How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed the Mexican Cartels. It's an incredible read, folks. Pick it up. And thanks, Pete Forcelli, for joining us.
Honor to be here, brother. Thank you.